Again, and welcome to the Sports Box, where the only opinion that matters is, of course, right here. I am Mike Galetta, a.k.a. Hampton Mike, along with my partner, Brian the Ranger Retard, bringing you another NFL special, 32 NFL fans, 32 NFL teams. Today, we take a run up to the AFC North, and let's talk to the Cincinnati Bengals. That's right, the Bengals, with unfortunately Andy Dalton trying to get it done in the playoffs. Hasn't gotten there yet, but you know what? There is still hope. That's why we're going to talk to Nate Bechtel today, a guy in the Cincinnati area. Nate, are you out there?
Yes, I am. How you guys doing?
Good. We're doing great, Nate. Thanks for coming on. Remember, Nate, we only get winners on here, so be privileged you're on the show today, pal. All right, Brian, stat me. Let's go.
Cincinnati Bengals, 12-4 a year ago, winning the AFC North, but they did lose the wild card round at home to Pittsburgh, and that's a game I'm sure Bengals fans will soon forget. Offensively, they were 13th in the league on the ground, 15th through the air. Defense was fantastic on the ground. They were 7th ranked against the run, 20th, though, against the pass, and they did try to address that in the first round. They took William Jackson III, quarterback out of Houston, 24th overall. They did bring in Brandon LaFell to replace who they lost. They lost Marvin Jones, but they also lost out of the secondary Reggie Nelson and Leon Hall. Bengals are a really interesting team to me. Marvin Lewis continues to keep his job despite continuing to not bring this team as far along as maybe their roster indicates that they should go. They've made the playoffs in 5 consecutive seasons. They have as many playoff wins as we do to show for it. And possibly no loss was more egregious than the loss to Pittsburgh last year, where they had the game won. A personal foul penalty for Montez Burfict cost them, put the Seals in field goal range, and that was that. Yep. Andy Dalton had an excellent year for the Bengals, and despite fans' thoughts on how much money he's making, how big that contract is, the guy produces, so for that standpoint, at least they're getting their money's worth from that point. A.J. Green continues to be one of the elite receivers in football. Yep. He'll be joined by Brandon LaFell on the other side. Jeremy Hill had a disappointing sophomore year. I think people were looking for a lot out of him. He was a very high fantasy draft pick last year. Though Giovanni Bernard continued to excel as a dual threat, played very, very well for Cincinnati. You'd expect the same thing in this year. Tight end Tyler Eifert, who may not start the year on the roster. I think he's hurt right now. He may come in a couple weeks in, but 13 touchdowns last year, burst on the scene really out of nowhere.
Nothing to sneeze at.
To really produce well for the Bengals. So, Nate, I got to tell you, I remember that game very well. Last year they lost to Pittsburgh. I can only imagine how just mad and angry and upset you were the way that ended. But again, it's a new season. What's getting you excited about the Bengals this year?
I mean, first of all, I don't remember the game you're talking about at all. No idea.
You're on heavy medication that game.
Selective memory.
Dalton's back, obviously. I'm probably of the small group that believes he's a championship caliber quarterback, and I think we would have been in a much different position late last year if that injury doesn't happen. I think next time maybe realize the 300-pound defensive tackle is not going to take the ball 95 yards to be able to tackle. But no, I mean the offense looks solid on paper. Great offensive line, a couple of good running backs. Like I said, I'm a Dalton guy, so you got Dalton, give him any kind of weapons, and I think he's going to produce. But I mean, let's not forget, A.J. Green is a pretty good wide receiver. Yeah. So always feel good there. And then get Eifert back. Hate the Pro Bowl, obviously now, but get Eifert back, and the offense is going to be pretty dangerous.
I think losing Hugh Jackson is a bit of an underrated loss for them, but I go back to Marvin Lewis. I mean, he's been there for so long, and they haven't gotten out of that first round of the playoffs. I mean, is the fan base over him yet? I mean, there's got to be at least a faction there that's just so frustrated to have a team that good with that much talent, and you just can't get a playoff win out of it.
I know it's definitely frustrating. I mean, there's been some ups and downs. I mean, some of those games. The team just wasn't ready early on the Houston games. I don't think they were, they weren't the team that was going to go far in the playoffs anyway. The San Diego game hurt for sure a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. Colts game, obviously, that one was a whole lot of injuries. But last year, I mean, that game really should have been, obviously should have been there. You could have had it at the end. So it really does, as a fan base, you get a little frustrated with coaching just because the way things went last January, and you got to keep your players under control. You got to get guys, to realize, look past what's right in front of their face and to play smart. But you know, I mean, Lewis has had a lot of success. I mean, he's been a great regular season coach for the most part. Let's not talk about his clock management, but other than that, you know, I mean, he's actually been pretty solid, and he's put the pieces in place. You know, I mean, I definitely don't like the idea of losing you, but Ken Zampese's been around for a long time, and he's been Dalton's, you know, coach for a very long time, so he knows what the guy can do, and I think we're in pretty good hands as far as Zampese goes.
And they got, you want to talk offense a little bit, talk about the running backs, Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill. You got a, some people say you got a 1-2 punch back there. Some people say, okay, well, one guy should be favored over the other. In your opinion, do you feel that Giovanni, and I'll get the feel from you on Cincinnati, is Giovanni Bernard the actual starter out there, or is it kind of like we talked about a 1-2 punch where, you know, you kind of mix it up and one guy's not a specific third down back anymore?
I think it is a 1-2 punch. I think Hill's going to have a bounce-back season. I think he tried to do a little too much last year. Got a little bigger than he probably should have been to take that punishment. And, I mean, he's slimmed down. He's looking, you know, kind of spry. I was actually out of practice yesterday and saw him running around a bit. So he kind of looks like rookie year Jeremy Hill. So I think he's due for a bounce-back. And then, you know, I mean, Gio, all he does is make plays. Now, this year, I'm actually thinking that you're going to see him on the field quite a bit together. I think, you know, with the which we'll probably talk about in a few minutes, with, you know, some of the turnover at wide receiver, you know, we've got to replace some targets and you know, get some of those catches. And I think Gio is he's very underrated as a receiver. You know, I think last year he was over 50 catches, and I expect that to go up into the, you know, 70-75 range this year.
And we talked
a big season there.
We talked briefly about the wide receivers. Obviously, there's nothing really saying more about A.J. Green. I mean, the guy's a stud. Guy gets it done. He's almost like a Calvin Johnson. You can just dare two people to cover him, and he'll get open and get the ball. Besides, and Tyler Eifert, we talked briefly about too. What other wide receivers or even up-and-coming receivers do you see making a really big impact for the Bengals this year?
I'm actually excited about the young guys. You know, I mean, it was a little bit of a bummer in the draft to have all those receivers go off right before we picked, but. Yeah. You know, getting a guy like Tyler Boyd in the second round, I mean, all he did was rewrite the record book in Pittsburgh, which there was a pretty good receiver that had most of those records there before in Fitzgerald. So, yeah. I mean, he made a lot of plays, and he did it with really, really poor quarterback play there. So I expect him to come in, and, you know, all you've read so far, all you've seen from camp highlights, the guy's just out there making plays. I expect him to, you know, pick up a lot of slack. I'm not one of the, you know, Cincinnati fans that's down on LaFell. I think, you know, as long as he can get the hands right, LaFell is he's not a dynamic guy, but he's a guy who can go out there and maybe give you 600-700 yards, 5-6 touchdowns as a number 2 receiver, which, you know, there's not, you know, many teams that get much more than that out of their number 2 receiver. And essentially, our number 2 is the number 3 once Eifert's back, because he's the number 2 guy in passing game.
Right.
But some of the young guys, I'm really high on. I think our 6th-round pick, 34, is a little underrated. He's been doing some things in camp. Again, like I said, I was out there yesterday. He looks solid. He's big, he's fast, he can catch the ball. And then another guy I'm kind of excited about is Jake Kumerow. He's out of a D3 school. It's not, you know, hitting me off the top of my head, but he's in his second year. Was on the practice squad last year. 6'5". You know, he's the kind of guy who can high point the ball, go up and make plays on the ball. So then a couple other guys we've got. You know, James Wright coming back off of an injury, hasn't played in almost 2 years. Good special teams guy, made some plays on offense, and then, you know, it's kind of hit or miss. It's going to be an interesting preseason for Mario Alford out of West Virginia. The guy's lightning fast, but you know, the hands are a little iffy sometimes from what you hear about camp and everything. So I look forward to seeing him in the preseason. And then, you know, a guy that gets a lot of hate from our fan base for some reason is Brandon Tate. You know, the guy's a solid returner, and you know, when you put him out there on offense, he has made some plays in the past. So. I don't know. I think the wide receiver group as a whole is going to shape up pretty nicely. You know, it hurt losing Jones and Sanu. I like both the guys, but you get to a point where you got to have some money to pay other positions too.
You're absolutely right, and you know, the salary cap really played a role in their ability to not keep Reggie Nelson and Leon Hall, who have been, you know, they've been on that secondary for quite some time, and they did address that with William Jackson, the cornerback out of Houston, in the draft, but. You know, to your point, I think most people expected them to go receiver in the draft, and I think that the fact that there were a couple of guys that went right ahead of them maybe dictated to, you know, maybe we'll go, you know, fill this need, you know, in our pass defense. It's going to be a different looking secondary for them. Does that concern you at all?
Not at all. You know, in all honesty, I mean, it was time to move on. Hall's been great for a long time, but it's time to let the young guys run. And Darqueze Dennard, I think, is a guy that we took high for a reason. He was a shutdown corner at Michigan State, and it's going to be interesting to see him man in the slot. I think Kirkpatrick's going to get better in his second year as a starter. And then, obviously the Jackson thing, having the injury this week, that's not ideal for your first-round pick to go down in his first camp. But, it's a position where if you really kind of follow history, we've drafted a lot of corners in the first round in the past decade, and most of them haven't contributed a lot in the first season just because we've got such quality and such depth ahead of them. So I don't think it's going to hurt us too much. Adam Jones playing at an elite level, and he's a guy that, it almost seems like he's getting better with age. So I think the corner position's in great hands, and then safety. Reggie Nelson was a great safety for us. He did a great job, but I'm really excited about Sean Williams. I think, when he was in last year, he did some really good things, and to see him full time, I think that's going to be an interesting thing. And then obviously getting George Iloka back is huge. I think he's one of the better young safeties in the game.
I think when you talk Cincinnati, you talk about their defense has been a staple for the Cincinnati area. They got a lot of push off the line with their defensive line, and their linebacker core is pretty solid. Do you see that falling into place as well with their defensive line and their linebackers being solid as before?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Gino was finally back last year to his elite self, and that made everybody better. I mean, he's the type of guy that just changes an entire defense. But then, you throw him. You got Carlos Dunlap, who is one of the better defensive ends in the league. I think had a kind of coming out party last year. I expect bigger things from him this year. Then Michael Johnson, Doma Tapeko, both those guys very, very solid. And again, they're better because of those guys that are on the line with them. Hurts a little bit to lose a guy like Wallace Gilberry. Sorry, he's a guy that he was solid. All he did was come in and produce. But there's a couple of young guys that I think could step up. Marcus Hardison out of Arizona State a few years ago. I think he's a guy that could have a pretty solid preseason. Maybe push for that Gilberry role. Can't say his name for that. And then I'm really excited about Andrew Billings. And he's a guy I followed his draft very closely. I would have been absolutely fine with him in the first round with all those receivers going on. Then he falls all the way to the fourth round, so obviously I'm not too high on the draft thing. But he's a guy that I'm excited about. I think he could push Peko for the starting role this year. He's kind of an immovable force there in the middle. I think he's going to be really solid. Then we just need to see Marcus Hunt and Will Clark kind of step up and see what they can do. There's a lot of depth, a lot of high draft picks, and it's going to be interesting preseason to see who shapes up.
Now, the last thing I have for you, Nate, looking at the schedule, I mean, besides some of the teams they play, obviously the Bengals play in-house the Steelers, the Ravens, the Browns are the Browns. They do have the Broncos on their schedule this year. Dallas, if Romo stays upright, that could be a tough game. You have the always tough New England Patriots. But what I find interesting is at week 7 of the league, it pretty much the rest of the year flip-flops. They go on and off. They go away, home, away, home, away, home. Not really looking at the opponents they're playing. Do you think that format for maybe 9 weeks of the last part of the season is going to hurt the Bengals or affect them at all?
Yeah, I don't know. The away games, obviously, when you get going over to the West Coast and things like that, I haven't really looked at the schedule. Those can start to throw things a little bit. I do not like the fact that we're going to England this year. I don't think that's good for anybody, any team-wise. I mean, it's obviously good for the NFL. But, as far as that goes, I don't think they can let that affect them. Obviously, it would be nice to string together some home games. But as far as the way the schedule lays out, it's going to be a tough early season schedule. It's unfortunate to not have Burfict in those first few games. But, signing a guy like Dansby, I think that's going to stabilize things. I expect them to come through the first 3 weeks at minimum 2-1 when they've got to play Jets, Steelers, Broncos. But, I think this is a team that, schedule, wise, I don't think it's going to hurt them, all the away games, flip-flopping and all that.
All right. I think you learn a lot about them early on. I mean, if you look at the opponents, even though they're kind of going back and forth home to road, after the bye week, I mean, they really only have, 1, 2, I mean, you have your division games, but the one game, at Houston on Christmas Eve, I think is probably their hardest game. They get a lot of their hard opponents out early. 2-1, I think, is best case scenario coming out of those first 3 weeks. Again, you're at the Jets, tough defense. Steelers games are always tough because they're divisional, and then you have to go to Denver.
But Pittsburgh without Bell.
Pittsburgh without Bell, and Bell and Bryant too. But I think if they can get through the first half of the year, say 5-3, I think it would be smooth sailing after that.
No, yeah, I'd agree. So definitely an early season, tougher schedule in the early season. really get some guys back. I think, honestly, outside of Green and Dalton, obviously, I think the next most important guy on offense is Eifert. So, got to get him healthy, get Burfict back on D, and, it's going to be, if we can get through those games, like you said, and get some wins, next part of the season could really ramp up. On paper, I think this is one of the best rosters in the AFC, so I expect big things.
No, I would agree with you there. What are they saying about Eifert? When are they expecting him back at this point?
It seems really up in the air now. The guy that I listen to most is the in-house writer, Jeff Hobson. He seems to be kind of edging at, he might miss a game or two. So I'm not sure. It could be that he's back first game, could be back for, the Denver game. So hopefully get him back sooner than later. Just lost, didn't lose, but have his backup has a hyperextended knee. So I expect that to be a big part of our offense. Those two guys get healthy. I expect to see a lot of 12 personnel in there and see a lot of two tight end sets. And I think it's going to help the run game. I think it's also going to help us down the middle of the field. So getting those guys back is going to be a big deal.
Well, we will soon see. Very interesting about the Bengals. So that's all the time we have for the Bengals today. We want to thank Nate Bechtel for getting on from the Cincinnati area, taking some time out of his busy day to get on with us. Nate, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. We're going to keep Nate in mind that if anything happens with the Bengals down the road, we're going to keep him in mind. We're going to give him a call and get the scoop on Cincinnati. Is that okay, Nate?
Yeah, sounds great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so remember, that's all the time we have for the Sports Box today. Keep an eye on. We got some good things coming.
Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Sports Box Show. All our new content is going to be posted there. It gives you a way to interact with us and let us know how we're doing and what we can be doing better for you.
Are you slipping over here?
Not at all.
That's all right.
At Sports Box Show. At Sports Box Show.
Attaboy. Because remember, Nate will tell you at the Sports Box, the only opinion that matters is right here. Thanks for watching, folks. See you.
Don't forget to subscribe.